Her latest work is Aliens and the Apocalypse, the Meaning of Alien Messages. Dr. Scott, welcome back to Coast to Coast.
Well, thank you.
You've seen recently, Arrow has come out with this report where and it interviews Dr. Kirkpatrick, who said, basically, we've explained all of them. We've explained all cases of UFOs. The only ones we can't explain are the ones without sufficient information. If we had more data, we could explain those too. I recall the late Stan Friedman had said, look, the best cases defy that, that the more information you have, the less explainable they become. Would you agree?
That's exactly what they found, just the opposite of what the summary and everything said.
You've been at this a long time, as I mentioned in the introduction. Can you give me a sense of where you think things stand now? I mean, with we made so much progress since 2017 and the New York Times story and Congress getting involved and the media covering it, things of that sort. But now it feels like there's a real pushback by the keepers of the secrets. How would you assess the progress that's been made, and what would your prediction be for the future of the topic?
Well, I hope in the future of the topic that there's enough people that have had experience that the government will feel that they're not being real credible if they say nothing's going on, because a lot of people are having some form of experiences or know somebody that did. I did a survey in my neighborhood here several years ago and published it in Scientific Literature, and it was people I knew that trusted me, but a large percent, like about 30%, had sightings.
Wow.
And I told them I wouldn't give their names or anything, and they trusted me. But that's a much higher percent than in a lot of studies, but I think it was because the people trusted me and knew me. And I said that in the paper.
Thomas Jane was making some comments about these beings, wherever they're from, how many of them come in humanoid form, and wondering why that is. If they're from far out in the universe somewhere, why they are shaped the same as us. Do you have a take on that?
My take is that we may not be sensitive to everything in our environment, and there may be forms in our environment right here that can just are way above us and can appear to us and not appear to us. I mean, maybe somebody's in the room with both of us. In my book, I was mainly talking about the media image, but the media image is what is often given to people, and that's why it's a media image. So I don't know, what they actually look like.
Yeah,
From my experience, I would guess that people can't really see them unless they project an image.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we don't really know what they look like, since they seemingly have the ability to change their shapes and at least to manipulate our mental perceptions of what they really look like, correct?
Yeah, that's my opinion.
The idea that so many of them would have 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, a neck in a humanoid shape, you think one possible explanation is maybe that they're from here?
It's a possible explanation. They don't exactly look like us, but some people think they look like us in the future.
And another possibility, if they are avatars, if they're, for example, it makes a lot of sense if these races, wherever they're from, is way, way out there, that they would send biological robots or something that looks like us, so maybe we can get our heads around it and not be so shocked by their actual present appearance. What do you say to that?
I think that's true, because if they look like devils or werewolves or something like that, we would be suspicious. But this is a kinder, gentler appearance. Yeah,
and then of course there's a lot of other shapes that have popped up. You know that from the Pascagoula case, which these things didn't look like your friendly little E.T. that we know so well, right?
No, they were interpreted as machines, and that's a good interpretation for now, because we're doing, our astronauts in other planets are machines. They don't look like us.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we send out machines, sure. It makes sense. So your new book, Aliens and the Apocalypse, The Meaning of Alien Messages, it contains what I expected at the end, but it contains a whole lot of stuff that leads up to that is pretty controversial. You knew you were going to ruffle some feathers with this, correct?
Yeah, I sort of thought so.
Well, give us give us in your words what the theme is, the first 3 quarters of the book, because it is, it challenges our general concept of aliens and what we perceive them to be. I guess most of us don't even think about their sex or gender, but you gave a lot of thought to it.
Yes. I think in general, the theme is that in several ways our communication with aliens is that we are solving our problems in ways that make our problems worse. And everybody pays attention to what the media aliens look like and said, well, maybe they're from Venus, maybe they're from Alpha Centauri or something else. But the picture that is often presented is short beings about the size of females or young with slender bodies and big heads. And I was contrasting that with the way we would think of astronauts. And our astronauts are usually big men who go out with spacesuits and breathing apparatus and everything else because they're on a different planet. And that's what you kind of expect. Plus, a lot of our ideas of entering a new place is the conquistador idea, where big men come out with weapons and things. And this is kind of the opposite of what we actually, of our actual vision of aliens as astronauts.
You make the case that there's a pretty good chance that if they are from some faraway civilization, that it is a female-centric civilization, correct?
Well, I was saying that they are projecting that image, and one thing I was showing was the moldings from Roswell of aliens, and I thought that was maybe the least biased of anything because Roswell was our initial reported contact, and it might be the least biased of anything. And the moldings in Roswell, most of them look very definitely female, such as the body that's laying out on the that they're doing autopsy on and things like that.
Well, we'll take that theme a step at a time, because you make a lot of comparisons based on how humans have evolved and how civilizations have evolved. But to start with, you raise some interesting scenarios in that questioning whether we're at end times. So many of these, what I'll call alien editorials, come with these apocalyptic messages. They're shared with contactees, abductees, and you get into that in the latter part of this book, and we'll certainly delve into some specifics. But in general, you make the point that we are at a key crossroads here. That we're not quite to end times, but we could be, because we've created weapon systems that could end life on this planet altogether, correct?
Yes, just the tiniest little mistake. For example, the blue screen mistake made yesterday, where there's just a tiny little computer glitch and it affects the entire world and throws everything off. Well, something like that could start a war, and we've set it all up for wars. We hope that no straw lands that breaks the camel's back.
I think that the part of the theme that you develop, that it makes you think, is that we've developed these systems, these weapons of mass destruction, and we're constantly tinkering with them and making them more destructive and improving ways how they can be delivered more accurately and in ways that cannot be stopped. We're on the precipice of total destruction, annihilation, and we seem to be happily going on our way merrily and making it more and more advanced as we go along, correct?
We're spending a huge amount of the national budgets and our total resources on weapons. And weapons are designed to kill us all, so it's not a very intelligent thing to do.
These weapons cannot be used. It can't just be partially pregnant. You can't have a limited nuclear war. Once you let them loose, it's all over. Would you agree?
Well, I hope they can. I hope there's several people with their thumbs on a nuclear trigger, not just one person. But back when Pascagoula happened in 1973, there was a DEFCON alert that nuclear was imminent, and nobody's talked about it for quite a few years after that, but it's coming up again now, 50 years later.
Well, there are a lot of cases, UFO incidents from over the decades where, if things had gone differently, it could have triggered World War III. There was dialogue between Reagan and the Russian leader about trying to have a dialogue. Wouldn't it be something if we were threatened by something from outer space, we'd all get together and hopefully there was dialogue about how to make sure that we don't mistake UFOs for their missiles, and they don't confuse UFOs for our missiles, correct?
Well, I think that's a very dangerous situation, and I don't see why the government doesn't take that sort of thing very, very seriously instead of saying they don't exist, because they ought to be discussing what to do about something like that.
You worked for DIA for a while. Did UFOs ever come up during your time there?
During my time there, well, once my sister and I had a real close encounter that lasted a long time. And it was when I was working for the DIA. It was a GS-11 position with the very highest sensitive clearance. And I was working in air order battle, where you identify aircrafts from satellites. And we had a close encounter, a dangerous close encounter.
Let's hear it.
My sister and I had two instances together. One was when we were real small kids before we'd ever heard of UFOs. And the second one was I was living in Washington, D.C., working for the DIA, and she was at Drew University taking postgraduate work. We were both from Ohio, and we hadn't seen the New England states, and so we were going up and look around. And so I picked up two coworkers from the DIA and took them to Drew, let them out, and took pictures of everybody. And then my sister and I went up to Boston. We got there early, and we drove up into New Hampshire for a while and came back. Actually, it was kind of near the place where the Hill abduction
Betty and Barney.
took place.
Right,
Yeah. Except I didn't know anything about it then. I just looked at the map later, toward the end of their abduction scenario. But anyway, we came back to Boston and looked around for a little while, and we couldn't find any hotels. And so we were going to leave Boston and travel to the outer belt and look around. So we were leaving Boston, and there was an airport south of us. It was the Norwood Memorial Airport. It was a small airport, and we could see airplanes coming in with their landing lights and their red and green wing lights and everything. And they looked pretty clear and obvious. But there was a light down below, and it was just a white light, no other lights. It was blinking off and on. And I was driving. My sister has real good eyesight. She's a bird watcher, and she can practically see a feather on a bird a mile away. And she started saying, this light is pretty odd. And I told her it was a helicopter blinking its landing lights. And I'd never seen a helicopter blink its landing lights, but I was in science, so I explained things to people, whether I knew anything about what I was talking about or not. And so we kept kind of arguing. And apparently she was seeing that it would be one place and then be in another place all of a sudden. And I wasn't watching it at all. I thought she just flipped her lid. And I was watching traffic, looking for motels and things. And so route on the East Coast, and started going down through there. And there was a woods on one side of the road, and I looked in the woods, and it was on the west side. Well, we were actually in Boston, leaving Boston after we had looked for motels and not found anything. And we saw normal airplanes coming in to this airport, and one very white, bright, blinking light below them that my sister said it was really odd because it would be in one place and then it'd be someplace else. And I wasn't watching it, and I thought she was going off her rocker. I saw it, but I didn't pay attention to it. And we turned on Route 95, which is the main freeway that goes down along the coast. And I was driving along, on the west side of the road, I saw this thing that looked like a ball. It looked like it was glass, and you could see through it. There was something that seemed to be rotating around it, like just a little line. And on the inside, there seemed to be a spectrum. I remember it as being shades of red and shades of blue. And so it would go through shades of red and then purple and then blue and then red. And I had no idea whatsoever what it was. It was either on the ground or just above the ground. And I'd never seen anything like it. And then the inside of the car turned green.
Oh, boy.
And I wondered why on earth the inside of the car was green. I didn't see any beam coming from anywhere. I thought it must be coming from that thing I saw, but it wasn't green. And I looked around and didn't see any green anyplace else except in our car. And I suppose I must have looked in the other cars to see if anybody else's car was green, but I didn't see any green anyplace. And then the green was on for a while, and then it turned off, and we continued. My sister then started yelling at me to pull over because she said the big thing was going to go over the road. And I still thought she was nuts. And so finally she was really, really yelling, and so I really pulled over. And then I thought it was going to be coming at a particular place, and I pointed my hand out the door window, and I was going to say, look, this is a helicopter, dingbat, and all that. Well, first of all, I saw a real distant meteor, and then right where that was, this thing came over the trees, and I decided I was a dingbat instead of her because this was something very, very different. It was low. It had very low. It had 7 square windows that were blinking, and these were real clear. It was like it was close. It was soundless, and we've seen lots of blimps, and I even have blimp pictures with lighted sides on YouTube site. This wasn't anything like a blimp. It was soundless, for one thing. And it had one unblinking red light on one end and one unblinking green light on the other. And it had a blinking pattern such that the first 3 were different from the last 4, and like it might blink the first 3 off and on and off and on, and then all 7, and then the last 4, and then go through that again. And so it had an interesting blinking pattern, and it was going right over the road. And my basic job in the DIA was photography. I was a photo analyst, and so I knew photography, and I had back in those days, a good camera, a Polaroid, but I had 3,000 ASA speed film, which you'd need because it was dark and night. And I thought, I'll just get a wonderful picture here. The thing was close. And I found my camera, I found my film, and got it loaded and everything. I was standing there just ready to take a picture. And this truck driver drove right in front of us and came back to me just when I was just ready to take this beautiful, perfect picture and said, "What are you doing?" And this seemed like a funny question because there was this thing up above us. And so I pointed at it, and I didn't say UFO. I just said, "What's that?" Like it's an airplane. Well, instead of looking at it, he turned around and looked in just exactly the opposite direction and said, "I don't see anything." Then he turned back to me. Yeah, that was weird. But then, talk about dumb, he did the same thing again. He said, "What are you doing?" And I again pointed, and he knew where I was pointing because he looked in the exact opposite direction and said, "I don't see anything." Wow. Then he turned back to me, and he made some motion. I don't know exactly what it was, but it was insinuated I was crazy. So by that time, when I finished talking to him, it was a different position. And later, when my sister wrote up a description for it, she said that while I was taking the picture, it seemed like it got in a different place all of a sudden. But I hadn't noticed that. But I had this high-speed film, and I was on the freeway, and I was afraid of getting lens flares from traffic. And so there was a hill beside us, and I started running up the hill, and my sister tried to stop me, and she said she thought I was running toward the UFO. And I told her that she had to guard the car, and she didn't seem to know what I was talking about. But anyway, I ran up to the top of the hill and took some pictures, and later came down, and one of them showed something, but I didn't understand it. By that time, the object had gone over, and it was circling the airport. It'd make one real fast half circle north to south, so fast you couldn't even see it, and then slowly go south to north in a half circle and blink its lights on twice, and that was just a pattern it was following. After that, I decided that it had been going south, and for some reason I thought it was going to go north. So I wanted to get in the car and turn it around on, the next interchange and go back. So I got in the car, and the truck driver got right on my bumper, just real close, and showing these bright lights in my mirror. And I think headlights are a little taller than car lights, and I was blinded. And he started chasing us, and I tried to get rid of him. I thought he wanted to pass, and I would switch lanes, and he didn't switch lanes. He just followed wherever I was. And I slowed down and sped up, and he just kept on my bumper. And I thought we were going to get killed, and I didn't know what to do. And so I was going down the road, the freeway, with my accelerator floored as fast as I could possibly go. And he was right on my bumper. And so I decided to, when I came to the next intersection, to just all of a sudden pull off and switch and leave. And I thought he wouldn't be expecting that, so he wouldn't be able to do it. And that was really dangerous and stupid, because if somebody was passing us on the right-hand side, we'd be in trouble. But anyway, it worked. And so far as I know, we got rid of him. So then we drove back to where the object was, and it had been circling the airport all this time. But then it took off to the northwest. And so we decided to follow it. It was real distinctive. It wasn't like anything else, so we didn't have any trouble finding it. I went again past the round thing, and the car again lit up in green. And so we kept on following it. And finally we got on this real old, miserable road that was gravel with potholes and houses a long ways away from each other, no way to turn around. And it was just a little bit faster, and I could drive on that type of road, so I had to turn around and go back. And so we went back, and we went all the way back to Drew and got there that morning at about 6 o'clock. And I had written up everything in detail, except I hadn't put times in. And Bud Hopkins interviewed both of us, and he asked me for a timetable, and I couldn't supply it because I hadn't written the times down. Well, recently, just a couple of years ago, my sister found the letters she had written that same day to my mother. So we had writings for both of us right after it happened. We didn't have to rely on our memories, either one of us. We found the one that my mother had written to a person, too. And we got back at 6 o'clock. Well, I thought we had left, and we were supposed to see the object at maybe 10:30 or 10 or something. And it seemed odd that we would be back at 6 o'clock in the morning, because it would only take about 3 hours in the middle of the night with no traffic to drive back to New York. But we found this letter from her, and she had times in it. It appeared we were watching the object for a whole lot longer than either one of us thought we were.
Is that sort of your entry point to the whole topic, that you really got serious about it after that?
No, we probably had a time gap, like missing time or something.
Yeah, no, I understand that. But I mean, in your life, the arc of your interest in UFOs, is that what really kicked it off? After that, you were interested in investigating it further.
No, we had a sighting when we were real tiny children, before we knew anything about UFOs. And years later, I discovered that the sighting had been something in our room when we were kids, that we didn't know about UFOs then, and even when we did know, we thought they were big things. But since then, I've read books by Jenny Randalls and things like Star Children, that children that sometimes see objects in their room, and then when they're adults, they see UFOs.
Right.
And so we fit that pattern, except there were two of us instead of one. And I think that sort of influenced me a little bit for a long time. And then I'd also seen another UFO when I was about 12 years old, too, when I knew what they were. So I'd had a couple of sightings by that time.
You worked for DIA. You had a really top-secret security clearance, as high as it can get. You analyzed satellite imagery and photos, and you also did that for the purpose of identifying advanced aircraft of our adversaries. So you knew what things look like that fly in the sky. This was a craft of some kind, you'd say, right?
That's what it looked like, but it didn't make sound. There were no wings, no propeller or anything. It was just floating, levitating or something. It wasn't like a blimp or an airplane.
This is not something you would report to DIA, to your employer, and say, hey, boy, did I see a heck of a thing here while I was on my off for a couple of days. You wouldn't tell anybody, or did you?
No, I definitely wouldn't tell anybody because they would say I was crazy. Since I was in that section, I just mentioned the subject of UFOs and just real general. And I found out that I expected everybody to laugh at me and throw me out or something. But I found out my supervisors had actually reported UFO on our classified film to their superiors. And they were real exasperated by the response. I mean, back in those days, you weren't supposed to see UFOs.
Oh.
And they reported this thing that looked like a UFO on our film. And we had reasons. I saw it, and there were reasons for reporting it. But they said their supervisor said, no, it wasn't. And that it was a spot on the film, but it was on two films. And so they totally disagreed with their supervisors.
Looking at it from your vantage point now, you know the DIA has studied UFOs, that they'd had, OSAP was one of the biggest acknowledged UFO investigations ever. They had 50 full-time employees. It was a contract, but there have been other kinds of programs and investigations within DIA. You realize that now, correct?
Well, at that time, I thought they must be keeping something secret. My supervisor had GS-13 or something. He was up. And he apparently didn't have any higher clearance than I did. But I thought somebody up there somewhere knew something about UFOs. And now that I think about it, well, they've been taking pictures of Earth for many, many, many years, and they have real sophisticated ways to do it now. So I imagine that they have some pretty good pictures of UFOs, would be my guess.
And would your guess be that they're ever going to release them?
Well, they did release the gun camera type things from jet planes, but they haven't released anything from satellite photography that I know of.
So somewhere you'd think there's a great big storehouse of these images stashed away.
I wouldn't be surprised. I've been on Wright-Patterson, their secured area, and I've been in what's termed the Blue Room. It's actually a building, but I noticed that around there were all these devices, even some distance from the building. And so I thought there's probably underground chambers for that where they keep storage and things. And they probably, in a lot of places, such as DIA buildings and especially CIA, probably have warehouses or whatever you call them of storage of that type of information.
So you were in the Blue Room at Wright-Patterson. That's amazing. You didn't see any saucers or bodies laying around. I guess that would be stashed away somewhere more secretive, I would imagine.
Well, at that time, I knew it was really, really secured and really, really weird, but I didn't know it was the Blue Room. And I found that out later in a book where somebody sent in FIOA, and they identified that building I was in as the Blue Room. I knew it was a whole lot different from the other buildings when I was there, though. But I was escorted. Another person and I went in, and we were the archivist at Wright-Patterson, so he was around. We went to a UFO meeting, actually, but I didn't get a chance to walk around.
Yeah.
My owner.
Well, you've really been in some interesting places at interesting times, Dr. Scott. They're sharing a fairly consistent message that we need to quit messing with nukes. We need to quit messing up our planet. We need to get our act together. Can you give me a sense of how far back those kind of messages go when we started hearing those kind of themes?
Well, I think so far as messing up our planet, that's something that we started doing recently. I don't think we were really as disastrous before as we are now. Since we've viewed UFOs as spaceships, some people have said they received messages, such as getting along peacefully and saving our planet. The UFO phenomenon may have gone way, way back as far as recorded history.
Yeah, I guess the messages about blowing ourselves up didn't really pop up until we started building nuclear weapons, though, correct?
Yeah, I think our first bomb went off in 1945, and what we view as UFOs began in 1947. Although there might have been other ones that nobody interpreted that way, too.
You make the point that these messages that are shared with contactees, abductees, it's sort of a democratic in a sense that They don't land on the White House lawn and make some announcement on mass media. They tell this story, the same message over and over to individuals one at a time, or sometimes in small groups, correct?
Yes. They're not going through our hierarchy. Right now we have kind of a male hierarchy with the males on top in the White House and Putin and everybody. And if they want to be officially recognized by us, they need to sort of recognize our social setup, and they don't appear to be doing that.
And you think one reason for that might be that they are female-centric civilizations, that they develop through female-dominated societies or civilizations. And you make the case that for humans, maybe the most important building blocks of our current civilizations were done by women and not by men.
Yes, we have the conquistador attitude of alpha males and all that, of males being in charge, and they are in charge by violence and brutality and swords and all that. Well, our alien appearances often are skinny little females, and often who they appear to are females and children. They're not necessarily to our top leaders, and that's ignoring our hierarchy, but they're giving the impression that we should pay more attention to our females instead of our males, and we're solving our problems such as aggression by being more aggressive. Like you're not hearing messages from the UFOs that say, make bigger bombs and kill more people. It's just the opposite. So I was saying that maybe they're asking us to pay attention to other ideas of how we were founded. So I was giving a lot of information about human and animal females and their importance, and giving suggestions that maybe our civilization was founded in groups of females rather than killer apes, which is a standard explanation. The standard explanation is that we became carnivores and started killing animals, and that's how we became successful. Well, that's an old theory, but it's very widespread, but there's not a whole lot of evidence for it.
Well, you do present evidence that backs up a lot of your central contentions in that in human civilization, it's the female contributions that are most important. For example, language, writing, communication. So much of the fundamental communications that are documented through history happen from mother to child, correct?
Yes. The people that wrote about the killer ape, which is the standard explanation and the most widespread and what everybody views, doesn't have a lot to back it up, because the people that were writing that didn't know anything about mammal behavior, and we're mammals. And most mammals that form female groups, they're presented often as male harems, and the males select the females, but actually most mammal groups are females. They're related females, like grandmothers and mothers and so on down the line. And the males are usually kind of temporary and fight each other, and one is there for a while and goes out. But if we are like the other mammals, we probably started out as female groups, and for most of the time, we probably were. And what is good evidence is that the first art and the first cave drawings and everything else mainly emphasized females. And if you go back far enough to where they find the very first carving, it's a female. If you go during most of the time humans have been here, we've been here about 200,000 years. During most of the time, except very recently, most of the artists featured females. They're just statues of females, and they've also looked at cave drawings, and oftentimes these have handprints on them, and looked at those, and usually they're the handprints of the size of women and children, sort of the comparative finger lengths of females. And so they have that standard picture of the males making drawings on the caves and for their hunting and everything. But I was saying that it's more likely that they were females and children, and the females are doing the same thing females do today, and it all through time is tell their children about the world, and they tell them about animals and draw animals and things. And I was saying that if you can draw a picture of an animal you have an idea of what it is. And if you have that idea, you can use it. You can think in symbols, and you can not only draw it, but you can have language that tells you this is a cow, this is a sheep, and so on. And that our ability to think in symbols might be a lot more reason for our success than men sharpening up rocks and attacking animals.
Well, I think probably there are parts of your book that won't make you real popular among some males in the society, but you make a persuasive argument in that, males are physically dominant, stronger, tougher. A lot of what drives civilization is the warlike impulses and building bigger and better machines to dominate not only other humans, other civilizations, but the natural environment and animals. But it's when men are competing against other men, it's largely to impress women, correct?
Yeah, they usually say the epic high part of evolution is the weapon or the big fangs and all that. Well, that's not the most important thing. The animals have these big fangs and everything to fight other males and impress females, but they never say what the female does. And the female probably has a lot more to do with survival than the males do, because what's left out is what the female does. Well, the males make all this big apparatus fighting other males for dominance and everything for each other, but they're fighting for the females, and usually after mating, that's the end of the male input. Well, the female does everything else, such as the mating, the pregnancy, the lactation, raising the young, and showing the young around, and that may take many, many, many years, and that's probably a lot more important to the survival than the males fighting.
Back to the part about the visitors, or the aliens. I guess most of us never even think about gender or sex of aliens. The common image of aliens, what they look like, these spindly little humanoids, it just doesn't come up because there are no obvious gender physical characteristics that we would associate with gender or sex, right?
Well, they don't have big muscles, and if you look at the moldings in, like, Roswell, they're females, and you don't see very many of them that show male anatomical features.
So your guess would be that these alien civilizations, wherever they're from, that they've developed in a lot of ways, as humans have, with female-centric influences.
Well, we're setting up to blow ourselves up, and I don't know if we will, but they may be telling us that we need to understand our own females and our own evolution better than the picture we have now, which is encouraging us to build bigger weapons and kill more people and build up our competitive military and spending time on that.
Could you share with us some of the messages that have been conveyed to humans by them, whoever they are, wherever they're from, that illustrate the point that, we're getting these messages that are not necessarily predictions of apocalypse, but they're warnings and sort of lessons that they hope we will learn. What are some examples of the ones that stand out to you that you mentioned in your book?
Well, one I mentioned in particular was Fatima, and this was where around 70,000 people experienced the event. It started out with 3 children who were taking care of sheep, and they had this experience of seeing this man who said there will be some more experiences. Well, there were every 13th of the month from then until I think it was October the 13th. Their parents didn't believe them and told them they were crazy and all that, but they kept on talking about it, and especially the younger kids that didn't know that they were supposed to shut up. They were using sophisticated language and things that caused the adults to wonder what was going on. But anyway, they were supposed to have a big showing on the 13th, I think it was October, and a vast amount of people had heard about it and came to see it, photographers and everything. And the person they were talking to had the appearance of a female. And you'd think, God's supposed to be, a deity is supposed to be a male in all these religions, a male would appear. Well, instead it was a female. And it was called a miracle where it was raining, the sun disappeared, and this thing that looked like a sun came down from the sky and moved around and dried up people and then went back up. It was a miracle of the sun. And they also gave predictions, and one of them has been kept secret from the Catholic Church, but it sounded like it was like apocalypse or the end of the world or something. And a number of other predictions and things like that have also said that that's where we're headed for. And there maybe are letting us know that our social setup of male aggression and the idea that it solves all the problems may be wrong, and maybe we should look at the other half, which actually is dominant, and females usually show cooperative behavior and help each other out rather than the antagonistic male behavior. And I was saying that maybe, I mean, that's a lot of the messages that are spoken, but there's also the messages in vision, and they're not showing big threatening men with weapons like we often do when we, I hate to say advanced, when society with more aggression introduces itself to a society that's less aggressive. For example, when the Europeans came to the New World, they oppressed the Indians, and a lot of that sort of thing has happened.
Back to Fatima for a second. You're saying flat out you think that that was a UFO event, not some spiritual religious phenomena, right?
No, I think it could be interpreted as religious or UFO, either one, or even ancient astronaut. I think it's a message, but it's given in visions and words both.
We don't know what that third message was, or do we? Do you have an idea?
This was during World War I, and one of the messages is that that war would end, but there would be another war, and then, which came true. They predicted that 2 of the kids would die, and that came true. But there was a third one that people are guessing it was the end of the world or something, but I don't know for sure if they know what it is.
The messages, apocalyptic sort of messages from them, whoever they are, they're not really predictions that we're going to blow ourselves up. They're more like warnings, hey, get your act together or else, kind of a thing, right?
Right. We hope we don't blow ourselves up. And they seem to be pretty interested in what we do, too.
Does that make you think that they live here, that they're as interested in us, but they're more interested in maybe the planet because they're here?
Yeah, I think that probably we don't take everything in with our senses. I mean, the universe, according to what theory you go by, might be like 26 billion years old. Earth is only 4 billion years old. There may be lots of entities in the universe that are nothing like us and way, way beyond us, so that we wouldn't even be able to sense them unless they project into our minds. And so I think that there's probably a lot more recognition of what Earth is around the universe than we think there is, because we're not receiving signals that we know of.
Well, I think if we were, whoever is receiving them wouldn't tell us about it, at least if it's a government agency, our government anyway. Dr. Scott, we were both privileged to know Calvin Parker. Can you share with us what sort of apocalyptic vision that he received? I have a feeling that he was not comfortable in sharing that.
Yeah, he didn't talk about it for around 50 years. It was just kind of like your standard apocalyptic vision. It concerned plagues and World War III. This vision happened when he was during the time of his abduction, while he was being abducted, that there would be some kind of plague that would get pretty bad, and there will be a time when it's impossible to trust anyone, that there was a vision of another coming world war, and a huge war where people's flesh melted off their bones and things like that, nation against nation and people against people. There will be food shortages and toxic land that you can't grow anything on.
And Calvin was really shaken by this imagery, right?
Yes.
And it was a warning, or was it a prediction?
It was a prediction, but then afterwards, people began to recover and change their ways. That's sort of a prediction that a lot of people have been having, though. And it's not real smart, but that's what we're setting things up for, because we're solving the problem of violence with more violence. Yeah. And that's just like a repeating circle that gets worse and worse.
You make a point, Irina, in your book a couple of times about these. There's several recent cases of different species of animals, females that have been in these cages by themselves for years, suddenly get pregnant. And it's like a virgin birth in essence, but it's happened a lot. I've read these 3 or 4 times in the last year or so, the examples where it pops up.
Yeah, I think we have a male perspective now that competition, survival of the fittest, and they always present that as a fight between two entities, and then the fittest survives and the other one dies. Well, I don't think that's exactly how things happen, because, like I used in my book, I used an illustration of one element that's yellow and one element that's blue. And if they fight each other, only one is left. But if they cooperate, you get green. And I was saying, and that's more advanced because there's 3 things instead of 1 left over. And I think you have to have cooperation to make your body or anything else. I mean, animals are made of many cells that learn how to get along together. And I think Darwin, it's survival of the fittest, like one dies and one is the fittest and survives. But I think if they both survive and work together, that you have a much more complex world in life.
Chris Bledsoe with us, UFO experiencer.
My son and 3 friends drugged me out of the house one evening. It was on that day, January the 8th, and wanted to go fishing. So along about 2:30 in the day, we decided to go down to the river, and I just took them. I didn't care to fish, and so that's when it all started. That was leading up to that day when everything changed. This amazing experience happened.
Tell us what happened to you.
I'm quite the organizer, or was in those days, a manager, job manager, so my duty in my brain was to get them situated, not letting them know what I'm thinking and feeling. I just wanted to make sure they were comfortable, they were happy, and I told them I'm going to take off and walk up in the forest and look for wildlife and just meditate. And I was struggling bad with my thoughts, and I'm sick, and so I'm crying out to the heavens. So I'm looking up as I walk, and I'm like, help me. What do I do? I'm confused. I don't know where to go. I got 4 little kids waiting, depending on me, 3 teenage boys and a daughter that was 10. So I went down in the forest along about, 3:30 or so, and sat down beside a big old oak tree beside Cape Fear River. I sat there for a good 45 minutes and didn't see anything, and it started getting dark, so I walked my way back out. I didn't have a flashlight, and I got out of the forest, so it lightened up a bit.
And you're still alone at this point, right?
Right, still alone. So I come back to where there's fishing, and I was ready to go home, but clearly I asked them, I said, you guys want to fish anymore, or are you ready to go home? And they was like, we just got here about 2:30. I said, okay, so let's get a fire going. It's going to get really cold. So long story short, we jumped up and went to work gathering up deadfall and twigs and sticks and logs, and had a pretty good pile about chest high for a wood pile, and then they started a little fire right along the bank, and it was about 10 after 5.
Did you have provisions, Chris, to sleep outside?
No, we didn't bring anything to sleep. We were going for the evening, and maybe, just dark or so come home. Well, it's not quite dark, and they wanted to fish a little more. So we lit a fire. And I told them, I said, look, I'm going to walk back up to the field.
And you're still depressed, I assume, right?
Yeah, I'm depressed bad, and I'm crying out, not letting them know anything, just a smile on my face.
Yeah.
I had about 1/8 of a mile to walk, and the road dogleg to the left. And it's starting to get really dark now. And so I was carefully, with no flashlight, walking up that hill. And when I got within, I guess, about 30 or 40 feet of the top of that hill, I began to see what I thought was the sun, the top of it, glowing orange. And so I didn't think about it to start with. And when I got up about 3-4 more steps, I began to see the whole thing. And it looked mighty odd. I thought, oh, my God, this don't look like the sun. What is it? And it was the size of it, and it was like the setting sun in the evening, but it had fire swirling around it like in a clockwise position or direction, and it was little tips of fire shooting off of it. And I'm like, I just immediately, I kind of froze for a second. So I took 2 or 3 more steps up the hill, and when I did, my field of vision got wider, so I could see more because the road was so narrow.
Yeah.
It opened up. And when I did, there's a second one next to it. And when that happened, I can't explain to you what came over me, because my whole reality at that minute was shattered, beyond shattered. So I dropped to my knees to hide, because I had still elevation to go up the hill.
Were you scared?
I was scared, yes, sir. I was afraid bad. And I'm a commercial rated pilot, so I'm very familiar with aircraft, and I've studied it for years, and I knew what I was looking at wasn't anything from here. So immediately I knew this was otherworldly. And so I'm hiding. I'm down on my knees, and I would poke my head up, and I could see over the hill and see they were still there. I dropped back down, and I started talking to myself, oh my, what am I going to do? And I'm going through this, but I was so curious, I wanted to look at it more. So I don't know how long passed, maybe 5 minutes or 7 or 8 minutes at the most. And so I'm making a plan to move, my exit plan. I've got this plan. I'm going to turn, and I'm going to run down that hill back to where my son is and these 3 men. So I decided to, instead of facing up the hill, I turned my body towards the downhill way, and I thought, I'm going to look back one more time before I take off running. I was unnerved so bad I was shaking. So I stood up in one motion, and I started a motion down. I'm like, I'm going to run, but I had to look back. And when I did, I'm still thinking I'm hidden, right? And when I stood up to run and I looked back, the third one, exactly like those 2, above me appeared. And when that happened, there are not words to describe the difference in seeing this thing from a distance and hiding and thinking I'm hid, to where I knew at a flash of a second that it knew I was there, and now I'm on its radar. So, man, the chills come over me, and so I just saw the third one appear, and it shot down to right beside the other 2. And I ran, which I thought I did, and next thing I know, I'm maybe 50 yards, I'd say, from the fire. And I'm walking toward the fire, and it's dark. And I could see the 3 men with me standing up by the fire. They couldn't see me coming because I'm in the dark, and they, got the fire in their face, and their heads are looking down.
And
the fire's... When I got to that fire, I come trotting up to it. I scared them to death because they didn't know I was coming. It was dark, and I kind of popped into their light, and I said, hey, you guys won't believe what I just saw. Well, man, they looked at me and said, where in the world have you been? I said, what do you mean? I was just up at the field. I haven't been gone 20 minutes. They said, no, you've been going all night. I could not believe it.
Like hours?
4 hours I was missing. I thought it was 20 minutes from the time I left to go up there to the time I got back to the fire, because all I remembered was walking up there. I had an eighth of a mile to walk, and I hid about 5 or 8 minutes, and then I thought I ran back to the fire. But when I got there, they're saying about 4 hours were gone. So I noticed Chris Jr. wasn't there, and so I had no idea where he'd gone, and I'm like, what's happened to Chris Jr.? And so they said, we don't know. He's been gone 2 hours. We lost him. He went in the woods where you went earlier that day looking for you. And we left one guy at the fire, and we took your truck, two of us, and we rode all night looking for you. Oh, I'm freaked out bad now because, my son, he's just 17 years old, and he's like a baby to me.
Sure.
And so I'm in fear for him, and I took off running. I ran across that cul-de-sac. I ran up into the edge of the woods where I had gone because he saw where I'd went, so I knew where to go. And I'm calling out to him, Christopher, where are you? And no answer. And then suddenly, as I start making my way into the forest, and it's real thick along the edge, it opens up once you get in there. And as I'm stepping into this real thick stuff, parting the bushes with my hands, I hear him down on the ground, flat on the ground, making a commotion. And here he comes up grabbing onto me. Scared me to death. And he's weeping. And he's shaking. And his eyes are big as plates. And I'm like, son, what in the world? What's happened to you? What's wrong? And he's like, where you been, Daddy? Where you been? You left me. I said, no, I didn't, son. I just walked up to the field. He said, no, Daddy, you've been gone all night. And he said, and these creatures, he said, they had me and I couldn't move. And I'm like, now I start to freak out at that moment. And what he saw was two little red orbs come out of the forest on the left and cross the road into the riverside. So he thought they were flashlights. So he took off and ran back over to the campfire, which was between him and the orbs, only 40 yards.
Yeah.
And told them that he saw somebody with two red flashlights. Thought it might have been somebody looking for me, helping. They didn't know, so they all got to their attention. Junior takes off and runs back over to where I'm at by himself, looking for me still. And when he did, he looks back, and these two red lights come out of the woods and start coming towards him. And they started coming closer and closer. And when they got to a certain place, he wasn't able to stand up and run back to the river because he was hiding now. He didn't know what that was. And so when they got within about 20 feet of him, he began to see there were these little translucent, glowing beings about 3 feet tall. And they had bright, glowing red eyes. They looked like torches. And they came up within 15, 20 feet of him, and one was looking at him the whole time. He was in shock when I found him, and he was hardly able to speak, and his eyes was just wide, and I was really concerned. And I wasn't telling them about what I just seen because I didn't know how to handle him. I led him back to the fire. It's about 40 yards away and down the hill a little piece, and when we walked back up to the fire, these three men, they were wide-eyed as well because they knew it wasn't like me to be missing, and they're listening to Chris Jr. and how traumatized he was. They were kind of freaked out.
But they hadn't seen anything.
They hadn't at this yet. And then suddenly, as we're standing there talking, and they're just listening about me saying what I had just seen and Christopher describing these little entities that paralyzed him. He said as long as one was looking at him, he could not move. He could not scream. The fear was so great, he was in terror. But while one was fiddling with cans and sticks, and when I walked up, undoubtedly they took off, and he was able to, once I got near him, to come up. And suddenly, one of the guys, as we're describing this, yells, "Look!" And we look up, and it looked like, George, the brightest star in the sky, like Venus or, the dog star Sirius, right. One of those brighter than that even. There was like 8 of them appeared above us, or maybe 9, and just appeared. And they started going out away from each other, and they'd come back, and they'd make a big circle, almost like somebody choreographed it. And then suddenly, 3 of them come straight down at this real fast speed, just getting bigger and bigger and bigger in front of us until they touched down on the ground, landed on the other side of the river. Now, the river is only about 50 or 60 yards wide at its widest point.
So not that far from you.
Not far. I mean, really close. And they were 40 feet around, and they were glowing white. bright white, like a welder's light, bluish white, and they were pulsating. And let me tell you, pandemonium set in. It went from these big, strong men and myself, workers and roofers and siding guys, to the biggest bunch of scaredy cats you had ever seen. We left fishing poles beside the river, still, standing there on their little props. They're cooler. We left the fire still going. Jumped in my truck and took off up out of there. Well, Chris is sitting in the front, and these three guys are in the back of this F-150 Ford four-wheel drive with a sunroof. As we were trying to get out of there, one of the guys is screaming, "Hurry, hurry, hurry," and he's looking back towards the back of the truck at the cul-de-sac area, and these red balls of light come out of the woods and started up behind us as we're trying to make it up the hill. Well, when I got to the top of that hill, there was a gate right at the top, and it was open. But I was going so fast that it was almost like the old show, The Streets of San Francisco, where the cars would leap over the hills and, leave sparks. We went over the top of that hill the same way.
You must have been doing 50 or 60 miles an hour back there.
Probably 40 or 50 going up that hill. Fast as that thing could go on that ruddy dirt road. And when I come over the top of that crest of that hill, nearly airborne, I had to jam on the brakes because right in front of us now are the same two orbs or two balls of fire hovering in the exact same spot across the field at the road above the pine trees. So they're about 300 or 400 yards away. They're a couple hundred feet up in the air, and they're just sitting in the same spot. They had never moved. But the third one, that it was red, now this is important, the third one that appeared above me and shot down beside the other two is now in the road in front of us, between us and the highway. They're terrified. This thing is now what I described as a football or a tic-tac. I didn't use the word tic-tac, but I described it exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
45, 50 foot long. It was glowing bright white, and it had light swirling around it that looked almost like crystals or little blades or spikes of light just revolving around and around this thing. It was so crazy that, and it was only 150 yards from us, in the road, 5 feet off the ground, sideways. And all it did was pivot and started towards us. And now everybody in the car is in pandemonium. We got 3 on the ground across the river behind us. We got 1 on the ground in front of us and 2 up in the trees.
They're all over the place.
Everywhere. And so this thing comes straight at us, and it's coming, and boy, we're just terrified. And as it starts getting closer, it started gaining a little altitude. It won't making a sound. And when it crossed over the top of my truck, I had the sunroof open, and I'm looking straight up, and everybody's heads is out the windows. And I could have shot it with a homemade slingshot. It was that close when it passed over my truck. Not one sound. It was barely moving. It was real slow. And when it got above us, above the trees behind us, it kind of pivoted to the north. It made a left pivot and shot off like a cannon to the north. Well, I hit the gas straight at those 2 red ones in front of us because they were beyond the highway. Made it to the highway, and we took off. And it become a race to get home. And it actually become a fight in the truck almost. They were arguing who's going home first. They were worried about their wives. This will be the last time I see my family. Please get me home. We thought the world was being invaded by, UFOs. And so the biggest guy out of the 3 actually won the argument, and I had to go 5 miles out of the way, nearly 5, to take him home first and turn around and come back that same 5 miles. And so Chris Jr. and I got home about, I reckon it was about 11:30. And there's so much
I bet
more.
you guys were shaking like a leaf, weren't you?
We were terrified. I wasn't. as we're heading 5 miles to take this guy home, we actually have to go through under a big power line, one of those high-tension power lines that crosses right in this very dead man's curve. So 35 miles an hour. If you try to go faster, you're really pushing it. And in 1982, my first wife, 2 days before our first anniversary, I had been hunting down on the coast and going all day, came home, and it was about 8:30 when I got home. And my friends we had a hunting club actually down in the forest and it was really nice, where everybody would come and, party, cook a hog and, have fun. And so my wife had gone there because they had a party scheduled that day, and I told her, I'll meet you there later when I get home from the coast. Well, when I got there, on my way, I go by this curve, and there's a car laying on its side. And I jammed on the brakes and stopped, and I didn't recognize the car.
Like a flipped-over accident?
Yeah, it went around that curve too fast, and it went end over end.
Oh, jeez.
And I jumped out of the car, and I ran up to it. The motor's still running, and the tires are still turning. That's how close I was there. And I went to searching for whoever the car. I didn't recognize the car because it was dark and it's laying on its side. And I walked up on my wife, and she died right there.
Oh, my God. So sorry.
And so, back up, as we're heading home, we got to go through that curve, right? And lo and behold, right in front of us, sitting over that power line, because it crosses directly over the center of that curve, there was this huge black-looking, it was a UFO of some sort.
Another type.
It wasn't round, it wasn't glowing, it was black, but it had a row of lights along the back. And it was setting directly over top of where I found her. And this telepathic is all I could say it was. This information hit my thoughts, and I tried to stop. I wanted to get out. They weren't having no part of it. It was a fight to get home. My brain was flooded with these words. She's okay. You can quit worrying about her.
But she had passed on, right?
Yeah, she'd been dead for a lot of years, but I was always carried guilt that I should have been there. It was my fault. But that was the first time I ever got any kind of peace from her passing. And
tell us about the title of the book, UFO of God. What does that mean?
Well, the reason I named it that, George, was because I was at the lowest point in my life, and I'm crying out to God, help me. I was born and raised a Baptist. I married a Pentecostal holiness girl, which are very strict, right? And so I fell in line and became a nice, church goer, and I was going a couple of days a week on Wednesdays and Sundays, and my wife's still very faithful to her church because her parents and her family and all there.
And was this before or after your personal bottom fell out?
This was all before. From the beginning, we got married. She was always like, you're going to marry me, you're going to go to church. And so I agreed, and it was just the most amazing transformation.
With this UFO experience, with the one that hovered over her, what happened?
As I'm crying out to the heavens, what do? I don't know who's up there. None of us do. All we can do is imagine, right? The universe, God, whatever you are, please help me. And these UFOs appeared. Well, once I got home and I got Chris Jr. home, there was so much more happened that night. They showed up at my house when I got home. But they never left, George. They never quit coming, and they still come to this day.
Christopher, in this episode that has happened to you, we're told that there was a lady involved or something happened?
What happened then was brought on by 5 years of what I call 5 years of darkness. Because after I got home from the river, I decided to report this thing. Well, I told the family. I told my wife and my parents, and it didn't take long with these guys that were with me. They lived in our community, and suddenly everybody knew this. Well, being from a biblical community, the Bible Belt, suddenly I'm playing with the devil. And so the church got involved, families and friends, and they all started claiming that I was bringing the devil into my house and ruining my children. And it got so bad, George, they called social services. Somebody did on me. And,
oh, jeez.
yeah, it was a horrible thing that went on. We were all seeing it. The phenomenon was coming every day. It never quit coming. And I'd say every day. It was there all the time, weekly. We would have orbs in the house, orbs over the house, shadow beings in the house. My kids were seeing it now, my wife. And we became isolated because the kids knew it was real, and everybody was, trying to separate the family. And so 5 years later of this misery that was happening, my kids, there's so much more here in the book where what happened during those years and how NASA came. They were there within weeks after I reported it, and they never left. In fact, I just had one of the head guys from Jet Propulsion Laboratory stayed 3 days with me. He's going to write the foreword on my next book. But it was all this, and I couldn't share that with public to try to vindicate myself. I couldn't never take videos or pictures. I was trying every night, and these orders would come. They would fry my camera, or they'd disappear before I could get it out. Mm-hmm. I had family over trying to show them this phenomenon. It would never cooperate. So 5 years on Easter of 2012, I had enough. My little girl coming home from school crying. The teachers were calling them out in front of the class, and kids being made fun of in the hallways. And my 3 teenage boys were looking at girls, and now they were completely messed up and felt ashamed. And the community did the worst thing.
They turned on you.
They turned on me. And so, and listen, I was healed from Crohn's disease. So I had a near death from the treatment for Crohn's. And the next morning on that river event that night, when I got home the next day, I no longer had Crohn's, no more sickness. And it was bad.
They cured you.
They cured me. That aided into why I named it this book. UFO of God, I'm praying for help. Well, these balls of fire come, these UFOs came, machines, the square, this triangle-looking thing. And so I walked out that night on Easter, and I was really angry. I looked up at the sky, George, about 9:30 that night, and it was on a Saturday night, Easter Sunday morning. It was the next morning. Well, my kids had all their friends over, and they were playing video games, and I was asleep in the back corner of the house. And at 3 a.m., at 9 that night, I went out and I yelled to the sky. I said, "Thank you for ruining my life. Thank you for healing me. I appreciate that, but now my life's in worse shape than it ever has been. Not sickness, but I'm ostracized out of the community. My family is ripped apart. And so I'm done with you. I'm never going to talk about this ever again." Well, I had the overwhelming, just like the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where Dreyfus was making the mashed potato mountain on his kitchen table. He didn't know what, right? I was at that point. I was obsessed with telling everybody. They put that in me. You got to tell it. You got to tell it. And telling it got me in trouble. So I told the heavens that night, the sky, I'm thank you for nothing. I'll never speak about it again. 3 o'clock in the morning, I hear this loud voice. Woke me up from my dead sleep. It says, "Arise," in a manly voice. Well, I jump up out of the bed to a sitting position, and it's dark in the room, and my wife and kids are on the other side of the house. So
you're the only one who heard this?
I'm the only one, because we were in a 5-bedroom house, and I'm in my back study, so they're all up on the front. Some still playing games, I guess, and half asleep. Next thing I know, I am standing up, getting dressed, don't know why. It was like this trance that come over me, and next thing I know, they lead me out of the house. I walk out the door, out in the backyard, 3 in the morning, and it just kind of like in tow behind these 3 shadowy beings. They take me down to where our dog kennel was. My dad was a hunter, so he had a huge kennels, indoor kennels, where he raised lots of dogs, hunting dogs.
How many acres did you have?
I only had 6 acres, but it was out in the country, and where my grandpa's farm was next door, and so I was raised in that area. Grew up hunting there.
Yeah.
Which I don't ever hunt anymore. The whole experience with this transformed me from ever wanting to hurt a bug even. And so next thing I know, George, I'm standing near the dog kennel, and this shadowy figure hands me something, puts it in my hand, and I'm looking at this thing, and I was scared of it because it felt prickly, and I drop it on the ground, and this voice said, pick that up, you must keep it. So I reach down and I pick it up, and I'm scared of what I've got. Don't know why I'm doing what I'm doing, because they had some kind of spell on me. And I decided I would stick this thing in the dog kennel so it couldn't get away. It felt like a living creature without legs or a head.
Like some kind of animal?
Yeah, like an animal with no head or no legs. It felt like a living bag, sort of tube shaped, like a 5-pound pack of hamburger. I opened the kennel door, I stick it in there, shut the door, and I thought, I can rest now. It's safe. And as bizarre as this sounds, when I stood back up, I leaned over, and when I stood up, this blast of wind came out of the forest and blew me. It was so hard. It wasn't in the trees everywhere. It was a localized right in front of me, like somebody hit me with
a force field or something.
Yeah. Blew me over backwards. I land on my back, and as I'm falling backwards, this bull comes like a translucent cow, ran over top of me, and I could see stars up through it, which is really crazy. When I land on my back, I roll to my stomach. I'm getting up to run because I don't know where this thing went. It all happened so fast. Well, now there's no more cow there. There's a woman, and she's glowing, bright, or, this bluish white light.
She wasn't the Virgin Mary, was she?
Well, I don't know the Virgin Mary. Could have been. A lot of people call her that. I was born a Baptist, right? I never was educated on that.
Well, did she have an aura around her, and she was dressed?
Had an aura, a bluish-white aura. She had a white, long dress that went to the top of her feet and out to her wrist, and had a collar.
And you felt calm around her?
Yeah. Well, the weird thing was it was so shocking. The wind and the cow would frighten me nearly to having a heart attack. To now, that shift to power, and I'm looking at this calm, beautiful, glowing figure. She wasn't tall at all. She was probably 4 feet tall.
Did she talk to you?
Yeah. When I got to my senses, I'm on my knees now, and her feet are about 3 feet off the ground. She's about 6 or 8 feet from me, creating a circle of light, and I'm inside that circle. And she looks at me, and she leans over, kind of leans forward a bit. Her mouth wasn't moving, but I heard her clear as day. She said, "You know why I'm here." And when she said that, I knew. I knew it was because I shouted to the heavens and said, "I'll never talk about this again."
This was God's way of telling you, yes, you will.
Exactly. She said, and I knew that immediately. She said, "This is your burden. You must bear."
This could have been the mother of Jesus.
Could have been. It really well could have been.
Now, what was that object she gave you?
I don't know, but she told me it was symbolic of humanity has lost its direction.
This is the thing you tossed into the dog kennel, right?
Yeah. And it was gone. As soon as she was gone, it was gone. I never could find it again.
What do you think it was?
Well, she told me it was symbolic. It was a symbol of humanity had lost its direction. She said, "If you'll tell what you know, I will help you, and I'll never leave you, and I'll let you share our presence with people, with witness, she said, with witness and with camera. This is the craziest thing, because for 5 years I could never get a picture. I could never take you or someone outside and ask them to come, and they come with them, only with myself. Well, suddenly I've started a database of taking photos and videos, and from that point forward, I was able to share it with friends, with strangers, with family. I was able to start recording, and I've amassed, since 2012, about 13 or 14 years worth of data, thousands of photos and video. And that's what brought the government in, CIA, the DIA, the DOD.
They heard about you and had to check you out.
Oh, they still do. I still work with them, study with them, whenever they need me. And, in fact, like I said, the director of operations of CIA wrote the foreword.
Are you now a believer in God again?
I am. I'm probably stronger than I ever have, but I'm not religious anymore. I don't buy into the institution, but I'm more religious,
but you're
more
spiritual
than I've ever been. Yes.
What do doctors say about your Crohn's disease being gone?
I can't believe it. There's no cure for it, right? But they even sent me to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, to see if there was any markers left, do more thorough studies. And there is no marker of it ever being there. It's gone.
Are you in shock over that?
I am, yes, sir. I mean, I'm so thankful. That's why I've dedicated my life to sharing this. I'm not trying to label anything. I don't want to label it, because when we start doing that, we start losing credibility. All I can do is be a guide and share the story and let people make their own decisions.
What do you think, besides the disclosure, what do you think the government is hiding from us, Christopher?
Well, I think they have a lot that is classified information that they don't want to share because of, whatever reasons they have. I don't think they know as much as everybody thinks they do, based on my interaction with them. And, for example, NASA's reached out to me to begin with, and they've always been near me, some scientists from NASA, different ones. And I asked them, why do you need me? You got telescopes and space shuttles and satellites. Why do you need me? Why do you want to come around? And it was really frightening to begin with, because of a government. Men in Black was out. And so my children were terrified when they first came, and they told me, they said, look, we see them, but they have absolutely nothing to do with us, and we'd like to know all we can about them through you. And so that started a 15-year relationship with all these different agencies, and it spread to every one of them about it, from the National Reconnaissance Office to the Air Force to all of them. And honestly, George, in all of this, it's been the government that has these different people that have been more kind and more helping to my family than the community has, by and far. The community nearly destroyed my family, and the church did. The people, the religious people, I wouldn't say the church, but and it was NASA and the CIA and these guys that fell in and helped straighten us all out as a family. So,
well, they did not believe you, or what?
Well, the government does, yeah.
They do, but what about the people?
Well, no, they didn't want to believe it, until they started seeing it with me. Then it all changed. But for the first 5 years, I wasn't able to share it. And back then, 18 years ago, it was a whole different ballgame than it is today.
Does this continue to this day, Christopher?
What, the interaction, or
the visitations and everything?
Oh yeah. In fact, I was up in D.C. last week. In fact, I'm going back Wednesday for a few days. But I took over 30 videos in D.C. between D.C. and Annapolis, Maryland, and 2 or 3 of them in the daytime.
Now, what about the who I will call the Blessed Virgin Mary? What about the lady? Does she still come back?
Yeah, she came back in 2013, and she came back in 2019, and that's when everything shifted again, because at that point in 2019, Easter, I was the sickest I had been with rheumatoid arthritis. I developed rheumatoid. I believe it was from all the stress.
You were falling apart.
Yeah, it's been a struggle. But I no longer am. I'm in complete remission, and it happened in 2019 after the lady came. Miracles started happening, but she told me one thing. She said, there is trouble on the way, and you need to warn the people that trouble's coming. And she said, we're going to step this up, and we're going to start appearing around the world in large numbers to people, because we're going to wake them up, and there's not much anybody's going to be able to do about it. And I put that in writing to the Pentagon, and by request of a NASA scientist, exactly what they told me. And so, if everybody's wondering why they're all seeing orbs now, it's because I said it in like 10 different podcasts in 2019. Because when she came, I told it, and I just couldn't tell it enough, talking about the future and how, and she even gave me a date of 2026, that there'd be something's going to happen, that there'll be a shift in the knowledge of humanity.
How is your overall health now, Christopher?
I am in total remission. My doctors could not believe it. In December, I went from $25,000 worth of drugs every month of chemotherapies and all that. I started that. I took it for 7.5 years. And after the lady came in 2019, I completely went off all medication. And today I take one pill that's called Plaquenil and vitamins. And my doctors, every time I go, and I go every 3 months, he brings the whole staff in, and they just can't believe what they're seeing. Because I was in a wheelchair in 2019.
Jeez, remarkable.
Yeah,